A 64-year-old man's search for true love, what he found instead. Harold was 64 years old when he realized that the silence inside his house had grown too heavy. For decades, he had lived in the same two-story home on the edge of town, surrounded by books, photographs, and worn-out furniture that whispered memories of a man who had built a career but never built a family. He had once been engaged many years ago, but the wedding never came to pass. The woman he loved had left him before they could stand together at the altar, and Harold had buried himself in work as a civil engineer. The years moved swiftly. His hair turned gray, his hands hardened from labor, and his face filled with lines that spoke of responsibility and long days. When retirement finally came, Harold thought it would mean freedom. Instead, it meant long evenings alone, the ticking clock his only companion. In those quiet hours, Harold began to feel the ache of absence. He longed for something he had ignored during his youth and middle years: a companion, a hand to hold on cold nights, a voice to share laughter, someone who would listen to his old stories and add new chapters to his life. More than anything, Harold wanted love, yet he knew it would not be simple. He was older now, and when women looked at him, they often did not see Harold the man. They saw Harold the provider, the one with a home, a pension, and stability. One autumn morning, sitting at his kitchen table with a cooling cup of coffee, Harold made a decision. He signed up for an online dating site, something he had once thought silly, but now it seemed like a lifeline. With trembling fingers, he typed his profile, describing himself as honest, dependable, a man looking for a true connection. He did not mention money. He wanted someone to know his heart before anything else. The messages came quickly. Women with bright smiles in their photographs and polished words in their greetings told him how handsome and distinguished he looked. They called him a gentleman, a rare find, even a dream. His heart quickened with hope. He arranged a few meetings at cafes and quiet restaurants. At first it felt promising. They were polite, attentive, even affectionate. But soon the questions began to surface. Did he own his house outright? What sort of pension did he receive? That car he drove, how much was it worth? Their eyes lit up not when he shared memories of his youth or spoke about his dreams, but when the subject turned to security and finances. Harold returned from those encounters with a heavy heart, sensing that once again, people were not seeing him but the life he could provide. He almost gave up, but fate had other plans. One Saturday afternoon he took a walk through the park. The air was crisp, leaves painted the ground in shades of gold, and the world seemed to be in transition. Stopping at a little cafe by the lake, he ordered tea to warm his hands. At the table beside him sat a young woman no older than 30, writing in a notebook. Her pen rolled off the table, and Harold bent to pick it up. She thanked him with a shy smile, and that small gesture sparked a conversation. Her name was Emily. She spoke of her dream to become a writer, of growing up without a father, of wanting to write stories that might help others heal. She never asked about his money. She asked about his travels, about the bridges he had built, about the places he had seen. She laughed at his dry jokes, and when he spoke about the mistakes of his youth, she listened with compassion. For the first time in years, Harold felt the stirring of hope. They began to meet often. Sometimes they walked along the lake, sometimes they sat in silence, and sometimes they exchanged stories that stretched late into the evening. Harold felt young again when he was with her. He believed, perhaps naively, that he had finally found someone who cared about him for who he truly was, not for what he owned. His heart told him that this might be the love he had been searching for. One evening he invited Emily to his home. He prepared roasted chicken, set the table with care, and even lit candles. She seemed touched by the effort, and their conversation flowed easily. For hours they spoke of dreams, regrets, and second chances. Harold was certain that he had found a kindred spirit. Yet as the evening stretched on, Emily stepped into the next room to answer her phone. Harold had no intention of listening, but her voice carried through the thin walls. He froze when he heard her words. She told someone on the other end not to worry, that Harold was wonderful, that he had a big house and plenty of savings, and that if she stayed close, life would be so much easier. The words pierced Harold like a knife. He sat in stunned silence, his glass of wine trembling in his hand. When Emily returned, smiling as sweetly as before, Harold forced himself to play along. But inside, something had broken. That night after she left, he sat in the darkness of his living room, the only sound the slow ticking of the clock. Tears welled in his eyes, not from anger but from a deep disappointment. Once again, affection had been tied not to his heart but to his wealth. For weeks Harold carried the weight of that betrayal. He considered closing his heart entirely, resigning himself to a life of solitude. But something within him resisted. To close his heart would be to die while still alive. Instead, Harold shifted his focus. If he could not find romantic love, perhaps he could find another kind of love, the love that comes from giving, from connection, from service. He joined a volunteer group in town. He began mentoring young engineers fresh out of school, sharing stories from decades of experience and encouraging them to dream big. He visited local classrooms, answering children's eager questions about bridges and buildings. He spent time at food banks, handing out warm meals to strangers who smiled back at him with gratitude. In every handshake, every laugh, every look of appreciation, Harold felt a love that was real. It was not the romantic love he once longed for, but it filled the empty spaces of his life in a way he had never expected. It was during one of these volunteer events that he met Margaret. She was 52, with gentle silver streaks in her hair and a warmth in her voice that felt like home. She had been through a divorce and understood loneliness. They spoke easily, first about the work they were doing, then about books, music, and memories. Margaret never asked about money or possessions. She valued his wisdom, his kindness, his humor. Slowly, over shared cups of coffee and long conversations, their friendship blossomed into something deeper. One evening, after a long day of volunteering, they walked together through the quiet streets. Without a word, Margaret slipped her hand into Harold's. He looked at her and she smiled, a smile without expectation, without calculation. It was simple, pure, and honest. In that moment, Harold understood that love had finally found him, not in the youthful image he once chased, but in the soul of someone who truly saw him. Harold's journey taught him something profound. Love cannot be purchased, nor can it be found in youth and beauty alone. True love is built on honesty, compassion, and the willingness to share life's burdens. He had once thought that love would come from a young woman who could bring energy and excitement back into his days, but the truth was different. Love came from a woman who shared his values, who met his heart with her own, and who asked for nothing but his presence. At 64, Harold finally understood that love is not about age, possessions, or appearance. It is about two souls meeting honestly, holding hands through the uncertainties of life and choosing each other without conditions. And in Margaret's hand, Harold found not only love but also peace, the peace of knowing that even after years of disappointment, it was never too late to discover something real.